In this video, I'm going to discuss two women who ended what can be described as the most consequential war to ever happen in the Horn of Africa in the last 500 to 600 years. And that's the war between the Adal Sultanate and Abyssinia. And this is a war that happened between 1527 and 1543. Now, before then, there had been conflicts that went on for a very long time. And in fact, after 1543, there continued to be conflict between Abyssinia and Adal. But between 1527 and 1543, it can be argued that that's the time that the two states experienced the most intensive war. Now, these two women are very similar, as you are going to see, in the positions they held and their activities. And they happened to be in the two families that actually led the conflict in the two sides that were fighting in the war. Something else that is very interesting between these two women is that they ended up becoming relatives through marriage, but that did not create peace between them because they continued to have very bad blood between them. On one side is Empress Sabla Wangel. Now, this was the wife of Emperor Dawit II, whose other name is Lebna Denkel. Now, Lebna Denkel ruled Abyssinia between 1508 to 1540. This woman, and that is Empress Sabla Wangel, came from a Jewish family, specifically from what used to be called the Beta Israel. With her husband, Sabla Wangel had 6 children, and these were 4 sons and 2 daughters. Now, the 4 sons are Victor, and Victor died in 1539 before the death of his father. And there is Yakub. Yakub also died, but died later on after the father had died. He died during the reign of his brother. Now, there is Galawedos, which is Claudius actually. Claudius is a name that is very common, seems like it was very common in Abyssinia, but the Abyssinians used to pronounce it in a different way, like many other names actually. And then there was Minos. Now, Minos also ruled, but Minos has a very interesting part in this story, and yes, we are going to see. The 2 daughters, going from the book I'm reading currently, that is the Portuguese expedition, the names of the 2 daughters are not mentioned. On the other side is Bati del Wanbara. Bati del Wanbara was the wife of Imam Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi, or Ahmed Gurey, and this is the Imam who ruled as an emir also between 1527 and 1543. She was the son of the previous emir, Mahavuz. Now, Mahavuz had been killed actually by Lebna Denkel, the husband of the other woman, in 1517. Now, Ahmed Gurey raided Abyssinia beginning 1527, we could say officially. Before then, he did do some raids, but starting 1527, he actually went in now full throttle and conquered almost the entire state or the entire country. During the very early days of this invasion or this conquering, Ahmed Gurey managed to take one of the sons of Empress Sabla Wangel and, of course, Emperor Dawit II. And he took 2 nephews and the son. The son is Minos, who was taken by Ahmed Gurey. He was still a very young boy at that point, and the way it is explained in this book, Bati del Wanbara actually took care of him, and it's because of her that he wasn't armed, actually. Later on, he married the daughter of Ahmed Gurey, which is very interesting, actually. In 1541, the Portuguese intervened, and I've talked about this in another video. They intervened on the side of Abyssinia. Many people believe that the Portuguese just came to intervene because they loved the Abyssinians, because the Abyssinians were Christians. But when you read the Portuguese expedition, the book, something becomes very clear that actually the Portuguese were on their own mission. They were not really doing it because they loved Abyssinians so much. They were interested, they had been sent to try to convert the Abyssinians into being part of the larger Catholic faith. That was the mission. So them trying to intervene was because they wanted to show the Abyssinians that we are on your side, so that when they move to the next stage, the Abyssinians would be so easy to persuade. And in fact, they attempted that after the war, but that did not go very well. In 1540, Emperor Dawit II, Lebna Denkel, dies. And he did not die at battle. Seems like he died from bad health, or he was sick probably, or something else happened. And he died, he passed on. At this point, he doesn't have full control of Abyssinia. basically Ahmed Gurey has taken over the entire country, and this Emperor Dawit II, is basically hiding in some hill somewhere. Now, when he dies, his son Galadeus or Claudius takes over. He becomes the new emperor. At this point, as I said, they not really having any control, but he's the heir, and he takes the throne. It is just a year later, in 1541, that the Portuguese arrive, and the Portuguese arrive under the leadership of one Cristóvão da Gama. Now, Cristóvão da Gama is the son of Vasco da Gama, who's very well known in historical books, or is covered very well in historical books, especially the history of East Africa. And this young man leads the Portuguese, and they try to help the Abyssinians, and in the end he's killed himself by Ahmed Gurey. But then the Portuguese continue supporting the Abyssinians, and in 1543 Ahmed Gurey is shot at the battle and he dies. During that battle, one of his sons is taken captive, and the son's name was Mohammed. Mohammed is taken captive by the Portuguese, and we can say the Abyssinians, and they go with him. It is at that point that the two women come together to resolve some of these issues. Now, that's something that is written in this book, The Portuguese Expedition, which is actually a book that was published in 1902, but the text in the book were written by two individuals who were on the side of the Portuguese and Abyssinians. That is one Bermudez and Castahoso. Castahoso was a soldier. Bermudez was, we could say, maybe a religious figure who was embedded in the Abyssinian royal family. Now, this is what, but this is the introduction I'm reading by one R.S. Whiteway, who put together this book. And this is what he writes. He says, at the Battle of Wainadega in February 1543, when the Imam Hamad was killed, Mohammed, his and then Wanbara's eldest son, born in 1531, was captured. Through the influence of the two women, Den Wanbara and Sabla Wangel, an exchange of prisoners was effected, Mohammed being restored to Mohammedans and minors to the Christians. So after Ahmed Gurey is dead, seems like there was a communication between these two women, and seems like they came to some form of truce to end the war, basically, and then they exchanged the children. Minus at this point is, we could say, a young man. He was actually a soldier, but he decided to go back to his people, and he married the daughter of Wanbara and Ahmed Gurey. So basically at this point, his family. After this, True, Del Wanbara goes back to Harar and Zeila, we could say, and the entire army actually follows her back to Harar. And of course, she's not happy. The husband is dead, and there is, of course, the next emir who takes over after Ahmed Gurey, and his name was Emir Nur ibn Mujahid. Now, he was a nephew of Ahmed Gurey. I think he was a nephew, or he was a relative in some other way. And after he took over, he sought to make Wanbara his wife. And Wanbara accepted on one condition, that Nur makes the effort to avenge Ahmed Gurey. And at this point, of course, by the time that Ahmed Gurey is dying, the person who was the emperor of Ethiopia was Galawedos or Claudius. And I think Wanbara considered him to be the person who did it, because he was the emperor, of course. And actually that happened in 1559. Galadeus is killed by Nur. And after Galadeus passes on, then miners who had been brought up by Den Wanbara, who was basically her son, but son-in-law, because she raised him and then he married one of her daughter, becomes the new emperor, and he became the emperor in 1559, and he went under the title or the name Admasagad the First, and he ruled up to 1563. And I've talked about his reign in the previous video, where I say that the Portuguese did not like him, because he did not like the Portuguese either, and he did not like the influence the Portuguese were having on the Abyssinians or the Abyssinian society, and he put some restrictions on them. And the Portuguese actually joined other people to try to remove him from power, and at some point they defeated him, but they did not remove him from power, but he passed on, and then of course that state continued with other people. Now, this story is told in two books, of course. The story between these two women and the two societies they represent is told in this book, The Portuguese Expedition, that is done by R.S. Whiteway and narrated by Castahoso and Bermudez, and also by Futu al-Abasha, a book that was written by Arafaki. The text in these two books, of course, were written in 16th century by people who participated in the conflict. And these are very interesting books. And one tells us from the perspective of Adal, and the other one tells us from the perspective of Abyssinia and the Portuguese. And if you are going to get a good picture of this conflict, I think reading the two books can really, really help. Check the pinned comment, check the description box, and if you are watching on TikTok, check my profile bio for a link. Those are my random thoughts.